Mr. President, members of the Executive Board, colleagues, friends, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you to the annual session of the UNDP Executive Board, and I want to begin by also wishing all those of you who are celebrating Eid today, Eid Mubarak. I know there is no better thing to do on Eid than having an Executive Board meeting, so I thank you for those of you who are not yet with your families for having found time to join us, whether online or here in the headquarters of the United Nations. Mr. President, I stand before you today to deliver an input to an interactive dialogue with our Executive Board. I do so on the back of a remarkable year, the year 2018, and this morning I hope you have all received the, let's say, shorter version of our annual report, which we have put on your tables. To those of you online, it is downloadable on the UNDP.org website. It tried to bring to you a sense of both the breadth of local action that UNDP supports across the world, and did so again in 2018, but also how, by implication and also by design of the strategic plan, it implies significant global impact. The report deliberately takes the strategic plan as the departure point. This is the reference with which you, as board members, hold us in management of the organization accountable. It is the direction that you set for this organization over 4 years, and the annual report submitted to you as board members is the first year of this 4-year journey. As I said just now, for us, the past year was a very intense one. It was a year that was marked, first of all, by a world that is increasingly confronted by polarization, by conflicts, by crises, and therefore the notion of working on development can sometimes seem distant to those who are in the middle of a conflict, are facing Ebola, or are indeed not able to even ensure their livelihoods, their food security, and all those elements that we define as really being successful development. Multilateralism itself is being critiqued, is being scrutinized, and in a world that is increasingly polarized about whether to work together or to outcompete each other or to ignore each other, makes the work of a development program of the United Nations that is based on the principle of cooperation, collaboration, and solidarity certainly more challenging. In addition to that, the year 2018 was also the year of rolling out the UN reform agenda that the Secretary General and you as member states agreed. A year of major transition and transformation where UNDP, as part of the development system, found itself at the center of these transitions. I'm proud to say that notwithstanding the significant additional efforts, investments and actions that needed to be taken to ensure that on the 1st of January the Secretary General could keep his promise to you to have delinked and established the resident coordinator system, we actually managed to deliver. And I'll speak to some of that delivery in a moment. But UN reform was also something that propelled us in UNDP to think forward, to think into the future, and to realize what a central role has been accorded to UNDP in the development system, and how many of you as member states view the significance of UNDP as a foundational piece of the UN development system into the future. Let me also say that this translates into a significant amount of new thinking, of trying to understand what the lessons learned are, and also how the development landscape is shifting. You have seen the hashtag Next Generation UNDP. It has become, if you want, a kind of mental bracket that we have put around many of the things that we have begun to roll out in 2018 as promised you in the strategic plan, that range from the programmatic to the operational to the UN development system contributions of UNDP. They go deep into making the institution future-focused, not only reform-ready, but actually delivering on the results agenda that we promised you. So 2018 was a remarkable year, and I know that to some of you, the reports sound very positive, but let me give you 2 reasons why there is good reason for that. The world is full of doubts, of self-doubts, of uncertainty, and it looks to the United Nations, it looks also to a UN development program as part of the UN development system and the UN family of agencies, funds and programs, to even in troubled times provide a sense of direction, a sense of reference. And I would like to remind us that despite all the bad news, the year 2018 still saw tens of millions of people escaping poverty, tens of millions of people becoming for the first time able to connect to the internet and to broadband, tens of millions of people receiving humanitarian support in the most desperate of moments in their lives. And these are also facts that define the true balance sheet of multilateralism, of our UN system, and also of UNDP at work. 2018 was also a year in which the peoples did indeed often feel as if things are not heading in the direction. But I would argue with you, and this is our continued task also as we work with governments across the world, that the peoples have an agenda. It is the Agenda 2030. It's not a magic wand, it's not a shortcut to nirvana, but it is perhaps the best hope of, despite our differences, despite the many tensions that currently exist within nations and between nations, that we have a vision for how development can actually unite communities, nations, the global community, and that development is an investment in each other that is perhaps the greatest return on investment if you are trying to avoid societies drifting into conflict, into division, into polarization, and essentially into seeing in their neighbor an enemy rather than a partner, seeing in international cooperation an opportunity in the global economy rather than globalization becoming an instrument of domination or exploitation. This is the development agenda of our time. It is the context within which the development program of the United Nations is seeking to play its role in the support to countries to implement sustainable development goals and also in delivering practical assistance to addressing what are sometimes the 17 greatest risks that we have identified for the future of development. It's another way of reading the Sustainable Development Goals. As you can imagine, in reporting to you today, it is difficult to immediately provide you with, after 12 months of implementing this new plan, empirical evidence. We have obviously studied very much our implementation record. We have many numbers and figures that we have provided you with. But I felt that for you as a board, at this point in time, 1/4 of the way through our strategic plan, it would be best to share with you that which we see changing, that which we still are struggling with, and that which we consider to be breakthroughs in terms of the trends, the indicators that we have, and we captured them in the 10 observations that are part of the annual report that I've shared with you. Very briefly, just in headline terms, they are the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs now drive the work of UNDP. In fact, in the year 2018, we helped almost half of the countries of the world, 97 if I remember correctly, in addressing the localization, the national integration of the 2030 Agenda, and also the alignment of that agenda with national development goals and priorities. Many other examples are found in the report. UNDP also advanced this notion of being able to address the complexity of sustainable development, which often is also referred to as the integrated approach, and accorded to UNDP in the UN reform decision is also this so-called integrator role. One area in which we have tried to demonstrate that is UNDP's advanced integrated ways to eradicate multidimensional poverty, new ways to improve integration, and in the way that we now work with governments, and have done so in the past, but will do so with even greater clarity, is to, as part of the UN Development System offer, address countries' immediate needs. And that integration function sometimes begins with basic data. It begins with a budgeting process. It begins with a developmental finance assessment. It begins with the MAPS missions that we provide. Many of these are the tools that are very practical in helping countries to actually address that notion of a more integrated approach, one of the key issues at the heart of the 2030 Agenda. We also assisted in the year 2018, 27 nations to develop their voluntary national reviews that they bring to the HLPF in order to report on the progress of SDG implementation. UNDP also, and this is the third observation, enhanced its focus on leaving no one behind. You can now look at both the markers that we have introduced newly into our program of work in order to track very specifically in development planning in our own work how people who are at risk of being left behind, be it young people, be it disabled people, be it the difference between men and women in national planning processes, how these are tracked. We are developing better tools, We are engaging in terms of that leaving no one behind focus, whether it is in the domain of finance, access to energy, access to healthcare or health insurance, in ways that I think are significantly superior and ambitious to the past. Fourth, the new way of working with humanitarian and other development actors is taking root. It will continue to be a sticky problem. But in a world that requires so much humanitarian support right now, and at the same time where all of us agree that it is also in the delivery of an earlier and more integral part of development support to countries and communities in crisis lies the way forward. You have had one session where Mark Lowcock and I spoke to you and debated with you how we are setting about doing this. We have significant examples of success, whether it is in the context of our work in Iraq, the current ongoing efforts in Yemen, or also the work in Libya, but indeed in actually many other countries also. And it brings me back to this notion that development is not a political issue about building peace or not having peace. It is simply an integral part of helping societies to recover as quickly as possible the pathway to development, and also by recognizing that early development interventions at scale in crisis situations are a most significant tool available to us as a UN family to make the outcome of conflict less likely. Let me put it in those terms. Fifth, UNDP saw a surge of innovation in its governance work. I will come a little bit later again to the advent of digital technology, of digital platforms, but whether it is e-governance, whether it is our work in terms of data that allows for governments to be able to target national programs more effectively, whether it is the accountability of public institutions through new transparent platforms, whether it is the rule of law, whether it is the promotion of human rights, we are exploring and experimenting in many new ways in how we can assist countries to address an issue that in some, yes, is less comfortable, but nevertheless in most is actually on the development agenda, and in the vast number of countries is viewed through the UNDP support as an opportunity to address maybe opportunities not yet yielded, not yet used, or how to advance faster in recognizing that a rights-based approach to development is principally rooted in the national legislative framework, in the constitution of a nation. And it is in that context that UNDP's work is in very high demand. Sixth, UNDP remains the primary UN partner in the UN system for climate action. In 140 countries today, we are engaged with hundreds of projects to support national efforts to address climate change and climate action. But the challenge for us also is to do so not only in a vertical sense of addressing a climate goal or objective or a national climate strategy. It's precisely UNDP's approach to linking climate action to development impacts, to development opportunities. And therefore, that integrator approach that we so often refer to comes alive when you look at, let's say, action that derives from a national climate strategy, but addresses poverty, access to energy, health and pollution, gender-specific strategies also, just to mention a few of the goals that come together in what I would like to see over the coming years to be the most significant climate portfolio within the United Nations, both in number of countries assisted, but also in the ambition with which we define climate action as more than just reducing emissions. It is mitigation, it is adaptation, it is about poverty, eradication, it is about access to energy, and so on. The report really does bear this out, and I urge you to look also on our transparency portal, where you can look at that portfolio in action. Seventh, UNDP showed good results on gender across all areas of work. Indeed, in our UN system-wide assessment, we score well, but actually as we look deeper, we also share this with you in the report, and certainly this afternoon we'll discuss it further. We have ways to go. And in one sense in particular, it is clear to us that when it comes to women in crisis settings, where we have often got stuck is still to treat, if I may use that term for a moment in inverted commas, women as beneficiaries rather than as agents. That may seem just a semantic difference, but actually it has led to a lot of introspection and reflection in UNDP about how we can shift that focus. Eighth, UNDP is a trusted and active partner in advancing South-South cooperation with diversing financial flows. And as you all saw at the BAPA Plus 40 conference that the UN's Office for South-South Cooperation, together with Argentina, hosted earlier this year, tremendous interest. Within UNDP, South-South cooperation is today part of the mainstream. In fact, there are 900 initiatives at the moment that we have counted for the year 2018 in which UNDP is engaged with many partners, including those represented here in the Executive Board. Ninth, UNDP achieved results by doing business better, re-establishing financial stability, addressing the issues of the cost of doing business with UNDP, the ability to also look at opportunities for greater efficiency, for cost savings, for balanced budgets. And without going to the numbers here now, I'm very pleased to report that I look forward to any questions that you may have on this, because I think we did a damn good job last year. It was hard. We froze many positions. We reduced the rental bills here in New York. We cut expenditures across the institution in order to ensure one thing, not cost cutting, if I may offer for a moment a slightly different narrative, but the capacity to invest in the future competence, capacity and ability of UNDP to deliver the kinds of services that member states are seeking. And I'm pleased to say that even the reserve allocation that you provided to us at the beginning of this quadrennium of our strategic plan that was there to deal with what at that time looked like a potential $50 million deficit per annum, we did not actually draw on. Last year, we didn't touch it, and that entire sum was directed towards program investments. I don't want to take more time right now in terms of figures, but please do rest assured, we have done our homework. We are continuing to reinvent UNDP, including with measures such as rewriting a program manual that some of you have heard me speak to before, that we estimate has now saved on average 33 working days per program staff a year. These are the kinds of things that take enormous effort, take some time, but will deliver in the end. Finally, the 10th observation, UNDP achieved excellent results while powering the repositioning of the UN development system. I will not dwell further on this in the longer version of the annual report. In the short version and in past discussions, I have shared with you how UNDP set about delivering on this, whether it is the 4,000 administrative actions, whether it's the 63 staff that we have seconded to support the resident coordinator system, whether it is the back office support, the backbone, so to speak, that allowed 130 resident coordinator offices to be up and running and functional on the 1st of January. Behind this lies a great deal. But it is not just that mechanical element. It is also our engagement. For example, in my role as vice chair of the UN Sustainable Development Group, chairing the core group of agencies working on implementing the regulatory part of this new system. There are multiple task forces at work. Many of you are familiar with management accountability frameworks, the multi-country office review, the UNDP. These are all pieces of work that are ongoing that require significant capacity from us, including, for example, in the Business Innovation Group, where UNDP, UNICEF and WFP are the only 3 entities to actually have seconded staff in order to allow us to achieve breakthroughs such as the mutual recognition agreement between agencies, which has been waiting for so long. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me briefly say that in looking at these 10 observations, we also share with you, through the Independent Evaluation Office, through the Office of Audit Investigations, that kind of X-ray that gives you the assurance that, we are not at all saying to you everything has just gone 100%. On the contrary, it is the Independent Evaluation Office, it is the Office of Audit Investigation that are, for us in management, the first reference point to see, is everything on track? Where are we performing? You have kindly engaged on the LDC poverty reduction evaluation report and how UNDP should learn lessons from that. We share some of those in the annual report. We looked at the issue of social protection, which interestingly enough in our statistical analysis of the last year seems to have in percentage terms gone down. We are a little bit intrigued by that. One interpretation is that through a more integrated approach, sometimes the so-called social protection projects are now much more integral, be they in terms of climate change responses, gender responses, but we are studying this. Our internal audit investigation, notwithstanding that our audit report, the financial report for the year, our accounts were deemed to be without any objections, we also discovered that perhaps one of the price we have paid over the last year in freezing a lot of posts and putting a lot of things additionally through our administrative and managerial systems is that the support to individual country offices, particularly country offices operating in very difficult environments, be they in terms of infrastructure not being present, be they in terms of conflict, that there was only a partially satisfactory rating into our internal audit. I would not want you to be too concerned about it because we are very concerned about it, but not because we think there is a systemic major issue. It is just, it's enough in 5 or 10 countries with very difficult settings to not be performing adequately in terms of all the criteria that this is pointed out. So I share it with you very openly because it is something that we have already embraced. I've put in place a protocol to address this, and I think in overall terms we will very quickly get the organization to where we want it to be. Another example, and I want to in a sense use it as a segue to my last point, you are observing, witnessing, participating, governing the next generation UNDP that is emerging. How do you go about constructing this in a world as complex as I described at the beginning, with so many competing and sometimes synchronized efforts from UN reform to also new donor priorities or new country priorities emerging? We have set about in a very systematic way to try and make UNDP that which you asked us to achieve. An institution that is responsive to the countries because it is they who invite UNDP to be their partner in national development. We want to achieve the kind of local action support that is world-class and therefore is to every country that works with UNDP an asset. And please remember, program countries have choices. They can invite or not invite UNDP. Secondly, program countries are also now contributing 20% of the total revenue of UNDP for work largely in their countries, sometimes also outside their countries. I want to pay my respect to them because they are also investing in the institution being able to be a partner to them. We have had to do many things at once, and just to remind you, we have now established a new global policy network to address the fact that we need to connect the expertise of UNDP horizontally across 170 countries. We cannot run country teams vertically because it is not affordable, it misses opportunities, and new technologies allow us to connect expertise and experience in ways never before done. Secondly, we inserted the accelerator labs already into 60 countries, and they are now serving 78 countries as they establish themselves. This is a massive injection in trying to bring to our country teams both the elements of innovation and entrepreneurship, but above all, to make the way that UNDP is able to work at country level more agile, more solutions-oriented, and also drawing on a far broader set of partners in the development process, thereby being of assistance to government that needs to move faster and on scale. They are called accelerator labs because they are meant to be about accelerating the capacity of countries to implement Agenda 2030, the 2030 Agenda. And I want to thank again Qatar and Germany for having been the launch partners, the core investors in enabling us to put this vitally important insertion into our program on track. We have also developed a new digital strategy, not to take time now, but digitalization and digitization, these two terms are until 2021 going to transform both how UNDP operates as an organization, as a corporate entity, literally across the globe. And secondly, it will infuse and influence our development offers in so many respects through the notion of digitalization, which is, the prospects of digital finance, the prospects of digital government, of e-governance. Many of these areas are changing the face of development at national level. UNDP, whether it is from the cryptocurrency end of it, right through to the rule of law and accountability of governments, is at the forefront of trying to help countries unlock that experience and expertise across the globe. And finally, our people. UNDP, frankly speaking, is nothing without its people. That is UNDP. Our people are the knowledge, our people are the commitment, our people are the courage of working in settings where many others are unwilling to work. We have just launched a People for 2030 strategy. It's not an HR manual, it's a new commitment to how we want to manage our people and how to manage together with our staff the organization within which they work and we deliver. Mr. President, these are just a few highlights from a broad spectrum of areas that are of concern to you, that are on your agenda, that form the backbone of your governance agenda for UNDP. Let me acknowledge that I have not touched on so many different aspects that I'm sure many of you would have expected me to, but you asked me this morning to leave as much room as possible for the actual interactive dialogue. So I would like to end my presentation this morning, first of all, by also acknowledging the broader UNDP family, the United Nations volunteers. In 2018, again, 7,000 volunteers, 83% of them from developing countries deployed across the world. Perhaps an even more intriguing figure, 17,000 virtual volunteers who now volunteer on the internet to provide services across the world. Olivier is here. Olivier, to you, and through you, thank you to all of your team and all the UNVs worldwide. The UN Capital Development Fund, more prominent here in New York, also visible to you at the cutting edge of trying to address this leaving no one behind challenge in the finance world, with many new elements of work, also helping to host the Digital Finance Task Force and SDGs that the Secretary General has set up and that I co-chair. I want to thank also Judith and her team for the tremendous work done. To the UN Office on South-South Cooperation, I already mentioned them, and once again, my thank you. It was a big year, a hard year's work to put BAPA plus 40 together. I want to thank them also for the leadership that was provided. And to the MPTF, which continues to grow and thrive as one of those platforms that allows our system to work better together, reduces the transaction costs for those of you who want to fund initiatives. These are all parts of the UNDP family that is at service and at offer for you in the UN system. Finally, let me also say a word of thanks to those who finance the work of UNDP. Remarkably, the year 2018 did see an increase, in fact, a record level of revenue in the history of the organization. We came close to $5.5 billion in revenue. If you are a company, it would be like your order books. This is remarkable given all the things that I described to you just now, and it is another tribute to our staff who really delivered. And the delivery set a 5-year record in 2018. I think at $4.6 billion, we have surpassed the last 5 years, again, against the backdrop of many of these things happening. And I want to thank, first of all, some of the global funds, the Global Fund itself, the Global Environment Facility, the Green Climate Fund, but also some of the IFIs with whom we have achieved a record turnover over the past year. I want to thank also the countries that we have already identified in our annual report here as having increased their core financing to UNDP, because notwithstanding record revenue, core funding is the backbone of this organization. So to Germany, to Norway, to Sweden, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Japan, and the Republic of Korea, thank you. Thank you for believing in the value of core funding. Thank you for making our work more effective because of the decisions you have taken. Notwithstanding that, you will see also a number of countries who traditionally have been major core financial providers to UNDP. I want to thank you, because without your contribution, we would be nothing but a supermarket shelf, as I have said in the past. This is the development program of the United Nations. This is an organization that has a purpose, a mission, and also a role to play in the future of development, and also in how the future of development will influence the ability of nations to work together, to avoid conflict, to invest in those who have been left behind, so that we do not fall apart, whether in our communities, in our nations, or as a global community. Thank you.